If anybody has chatted with me in the last year or six, you may have already heard a little bit about this, but this is something that's been a long time coming in the vision of what we wanted to do with Sample Manager and our LIMS suite of products. And so I'm really excited to kind of share with you what this is going to look like today, as we have literally just shipped some of delivered some of these in the most recent release. So before I kind of go into the live demo, I want to level set a little bit about what workflow automation is, because I think there's a lot of terminology out there and everybody seems to have a different idea of what this means. So overall, if you use ChatGPT or Google and ask what is workflow automation in a lab, it's really about automatically managing, executing, and tracking laboratory processes. And so that can have a lot of different flavors depending on what you're doing or what software you're using. But traditionally, in other LIMS products, workflow automation tends to be kind of a bolted on product that is not always fully integrated into the applications. It also tends to be very code dependent. So, sure, you can create a custom workflow as long as you can code it yourself and manage that overhead. And they also tend to be really inflexible over time. And this is really because of the fact that they're code dependent and it can't be easily adjusted as workflows in the lab change or get modified over time. So what workflow automation means at LabKey is really making sure, just like all of our other features, that we have a truly built-in feature set and it's not sort of bolted on. We also want to make sure that it's configurable without code. So just like the majority of our other features, we really want to ensure that scientists can own this. And that means that if scientists can own it, it can also evolve as the lab evolves and as the science changes or projects get added. And so the vision here for what workflows at LabKey means is really around having kind of this as a core LIMS capability. So as I mentioned before in the product update, making sure that we're evolving from a system of record to also a system of execution. And this ultimately will help with efficiency in the lab, control of standard procedures, and execution. The second piece here is making sure that there's less manual work for people. And that means that they can actually have a much more meaningful focus on the science rather than the software or the data management component. Coming from the lab, this one is really very near and dear to my heart, right? We want people to be empowered by LabKey and not burdened by the use of the system. And so making sure that we're working to optimize steps in decision making so that those scientists can actually focus on the work at hand. And then lastly, as I mentioned, really making sure that there's a no-code component and that this can be a completely lab-owned process and lab-controlled process. And this means then that the time between changes can be vastly decreased, as well as making sure that workflows aren't static and they're not getting kind of outdated quickly and folks are having to apply those workarounds. So most of you probably already know kind of the top three squares here when we talk about what are LabKey workflows. We have our workflow templates, and these really allow teams to define a standard set of tasks and fields, and this is something that you can do today. And a workflow job is basically an instantiation of that template. So I have a template to do some PBMC processing. Each time I go in to do that processing, I will start a workflow job based on that template and have specific samples for the work that I'm executing that day. Tasks as part of the workflow framework are these checklist style steps that users have traditionally completed manually. So in a PBMC processing, I might go through my phycol gradient and centrifugation and then counting cells and then freezing them. So those might be sort of the individual tasks that I track. The new piece of this that we're sort of introducing this quarter is our workflow actions. And so these actions are designed to help automate and or validate work that's happening within a task. And this is the piece that we'll sort of be highlighting today and talking about. So what these actions really are built to do, I've sort of bucket them into three different areas. The places with the green check marks are things that we're actually going to show today on the demo, and you'll have access to sort of shortly in the LIMS product in the next release. The orange arrows are what is in development right now and what we plan to deliver in the short term. And then these blue dots essentially these are ideas that we have that we want to continue to build out our workflow framework with your feedback in mind. So at the end of this, we'll actually have a poll, and happy to have individual conversations with you as well on what's the most important next step that we can be taking to help support your laboratory. So the core actions that exist today are importing assay data directly within workflows. This is something that Lance showed. This is something we've supported for a while now within our software. But the second one is actually three additional actions that someone can configure and then take within a workflow job. And that's really the ability to derive, aliquot, or pool samples automatically from a job. And so we'll look at that today. Moving samples into storage, creation of samples, updating or editing samples, all of these are in development right now that we want to help support. These are the most common 5 actions that we've seen our customers take within the system. And so it was a really good starting point to lay that foundation for more enhancements later on. And then lastly here, the ability to capture approvals and sign-offs with e-signatures is also something that we've heard directly from customers that we definitely want to build into this workflow automation. So the second kind of component of this is also making sure that end users are working with the right data automatically. So that really means that as part of the workflow template, administrators can filter and define what samples or sources each task is getting operated on. And that will allow for sort of less tribal knowledge to have to get passed on through the laboratory and more clear execution of work within the system. The other thing that we have built in as part of this first effort is making sure that as samples are getting created or derived within the workflow job, that we're adding those automatically to the job so users don't have to go back and remember to add them as outputs. And then this last piece here is continuing to support these real world lab processes. And so we know that science does not operate in sort of clean linear lines. And so we want to have the ability to chain workflows together, also potentially run tasks in parallel or reiterate on tasks. And then that first bullet there is really expressing the need to be able to validate the work that's happening. And this is, again, as part of the last several months of conversations that I've had with customers, something that comes up again and again. And so the ability to ensure that we dictated work to someone and that then that work was executed in the way we expected, or when it wasn't executed in the way that we expected, we're able to capture those deviations. So that's something that I'm very interested in continuing to build out and learn directly from you as a customer. So I'll go into the live demo here, and I have a really simple setup. As most of you know, I'm from sort of a clinical translational background, so we're going to use this example of being able to extract PBMCs and plasma from our blood samples that we receive. And so I'll go directly into this demo workflow that I already have set up. And we'll walk through the workflow, and then we'll actually go back and take a look at how the template was constructed. But this workflow then, as a user, I'm basically coming in partway through this process where blood samples have been registered and added to this job. So that's what's kind of being represented here in our samples tab. If I go to the task that I'm sort of due for at the moment, one of the things that I'm prompted to do now is to derive PBMCs and plasma from these blood samples that I have. So instead of going over to a separate place in the system, I'm able to select this here and derive these directly. And so we'll just sort of create them quickly and go from there. So we'll just say that these are available. These ones are my primary samples. Similar to what Zach showed, we also often kind of share using that primary sample status as a clear indicator of what needs to be aliquoted. So now I've created those derivatives. We can go back to that sample tab within this workflow job and see that those samples have also been added automatically to our workflow job. I'll complete this task here. And now I'm being prompted to aliquot. And so what I want to do here is aliquot those 3 plasma samples. We've got the filter applied, as Lance was showing in the previous presentation. And so when I choose to aliquot, I can automatically we're prompted with sort of the default number that's been configured by the template. And then I can go into the grid and continue to sort of add those samples. So here we'll say that's 1 mil each. And then again, with the creation of those aliquots, these are being added to my, my workflow job here. So I'll complete that task. And then now I've got to measure the viability of my PBMC samples and then basically create aliquots of those for storage. So here I'm being prompted, again, sort of filtered on our PBMC samples. I want to import that cell viability data. I'm going to fill out some information here. And then kind of copy and paste what I had in my clipboard. So once that data is imported, again, I can go and view the run. I can also directly look at that assay data here. It's been automatically linked and included in this workflow job. I'll now aliquot those samples kind of to guidelines. And finish creating those. And so now we've got all of the samples that are both inputs and outputs to the system within our workflow job and within our system. And so this really eases that process as I'm going through. I've been able to apply business logic around, what are the number of aliquots that we want? And in the future, what we'll be able to do is also prompt for storage actions to happen here directly, as well as things like predefining what those default values should be for the user. The last thing I want to talk about too is also making sure that we're capturing kind of those deviations. And so this is something very interested in learning from everyone on of how strict we want to be or how flexible we want to be in capturing those deviations. So if you're in a meeting with me in the coming weeks, be sure to be prepared for me to ask you that. So I'll go in now to the job template and we can take a look at how this was set up. So if we go into the blood processing template, I'm just going to edit it so we can view kind of what this looks like. But as an administrator, then my selection was to add the filters that I wanted applied for this task and then add those actions. And these are very similar in configuration or setup that I would normally use in creation of PBMCs or plasma from blood in kind of the standard grid way. And so it's very familiar for me to set this up. Let me go into sort of this task where we also are allowing for that import of assay data to be there. and then making sure that we're also having the edit. So if I need to allow users to edit those filters for any given reason or to have a little bit more flexibility, this option is there for someone to use. The other thing that we have tried to build into the system is the ability to modify those filters over time in the same template. And so this is something, again, that will allow for flexibility as people continue to use workflow and want to use these workflow automation features. So with that, I will ask for a poll, actually, and maybe Tori, you can help me with this. But I'm very curious, in the stuff that we've talked about today or any other ideas that you have, if you want to share what you'd like to see us build next. As most of you know, we operate very heavily with feedback from our customers. And so we want to build not things that exist and are exciting directly in my head, but also are really exciting for you guys in the lab. So if you can fill out this poll, this will help direct our future product roadmap and help align us on features that we should build next. Awesome. I'll keep that going because it looks like people are still responding, but then maybe we'll share at the end. So yeah, feel free to keep adding to that. But in the meantime, happy to take any questions or any questions from the conference at all too at this point as well. Okay, great. I'll end this poll and it looks like, can I share these results? I don't know if I'm sharing them or not, but from my side, it looks like a fairly even distribution, which is great. But some of the things are being able to run tasks in parallel, which we've definitely heard, and chaining those workflows together. So that I think is great feedback, right? You saw that this was something that we wanted to consider and to build, and so this is very useful and certainly will help us determine our next steps. Thank you everyone for joining. I know for some of you it's really late or really early, depending on where you are in the world. We always appreciate your engagement and your feedback and working with LabKey. Have a great day.